All right, we may have some other folks join us here. I know Michael's going to keep letting folks in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Josh Waldo. I'm the fire chief here in Bozeman, Montana. Sit on the board of directors for the Montana State Fire Chiefs Association, and we're glad you could join us for our monthly leadership training. Where tonight we got probably one of the hottest topics in the fire service, and I'm just going to call it everything batteries, because we're going to talk about a lot of things around batteries and storage systems. For those of you who aren't aware, next week is the National Firefighter Safety Stand-down, and it's on this very topic. So you're actually getting a week's head start, and I hope that the education you get tonight from two great instructors here kind of tees up some great conversations in your fire stations next week as we have the safety stand-down. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. If you've got questions, if you want to drop them in the chat or hold them till the end, once the presenters are done, I'll try to clean those out of the chat or come back and take questions at that point. With it being on Zoom, it'll just flow a little bit better if we do it that way. And then there'll be a survey and a certificate that will come for attendance tonight. That'll come via email. So just watch for that at the end of our class. So I'm happy to welcome our two presenters tonight. First off, you'll have Neal Ullman. Neal is with Montana Montana DEQ. He'll have a couple of things to talk to us about specifically here in Montana. And then we'll have Chief Mike O'Brien. Chief O'Brien is the fire chief with the Brighton Fire Authority in Brighton, Michigan. He is also the international director for the Fire and Life Safety Section and sits on the International Association of Fire Chiefs Board of Directors and has quickly become the subject matter expert on everything batteries for the fire chief. So we are thrilled to have both of them here tonight. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Neal to get us going.
Thanks, Chief Waldo. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. Again, my name is Neal Ullman. I'm an energy resource professional in the Energy Office at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Most of my job is about clean transportation issues, and obviously a lot of that has been focused the last couple of years on electric vehicles. But I think what Chief O'Brien and you all are going to be talking about moving into the future is not only electric vehicles, but also lithium-ion batteries in general, whether you're talking about EVs that have those big battery packs underneath them, or even our cell phones and also the laptop that I'm on. These are going to be things that you all are going to be addressing in the future. And my interest in reaching out to Chief Waldo initially was making sure that you all in Montanans had the training necessary, seeing if there was more interest in doing some more hands-on training in the future. Chief Waldo, I think, sent at least one of his firefighters down to Denver not too long ago after I found out that the Colorado Department of Transportation was hosting a hands-on training in partnership with General Motors. And it seemed to me like we should have that same kind of opportunity here in Montana. I want to walk through a little bit, though, of kind of the lay of the land for not only electric vehicles, but also battery storage systems. There's online with Underwriters Laboratory a training based off of a incident that happened in Surprise, Nevada with a battery storage unit. We don't quite have that type of technology here in Montana yet, but a lot of this is coming sooner or later. So what the Energy Office is, and so each state and the District of Columbia have an energy office that's recognized by the U.S. Department of Energy. And so here in Montana, it is with the DEQ. And so we do a lot of different things: energy efficiency, renewable energy, funding for some of those things. A lot of it is also just providing information. Smart Schools program is something that's been a big success the last number of years. But then also transportation. And originally we were focused on alternative fuels, so things like methanol, biodiesel, ethanol, and a whole host of other liquid fuels. But more and more, as you all have probably seen in the news, electric vehicles are taking stage center with alternative fuels right now. And we've been doing work on that the last couple of years through a variety of different ways. Some of you may have heard about 6 years ago, I suppose it is now, the big Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement, where Volkswagen was caught doing naughty things by putting cheater devices into its passenger diesel-powered vehicles, causing emissions and trying to get away with it from emissions testing. Each of the states were designated as beneficiaries of that settlement. Montana received approximately $12.6 million as part of that settlement. We've been using it to fund school bus replacements, whether it's replacing new diesels with cleaner diesels or gasoline or propane. We've also done a number of other types of vehicles as well as electric charging stations. And then on electric charging station infrastructure, we're also working with our colleagues over the Montana Department of Transportation with funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed by the president, I guess just over a year and a half ago now, to build out a nationwide and here in Montana, statewide network of electric charging infrastructure to support the increasing growth of electric vehicles across the country. Here in Montana, okay, here we go. We're still kind of, dipping our toes into the water, if you will, of electric vehicles. Of a total statewide fleet of registered vehicles of around 1.6, 1.7 million total vehicles, there are about 30, as of December of 2022, about 3,100 registered fully electric vehicles in Montana, and about 1,400 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Now, the difference is that there's a couple of different terms. When you're talking about a hybrid vehicle, you're talking about things like a Toyota Prius, for example, which is still a gasoline-powered engine that has a small battery to assist that gasoline engine to increase fuel efficiency. With a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, you can also plug the vehicle into a charging station. The battery isn't that big. Probably the highest capacity plug-in hybrid passenger vehicle is something called the Chevy Volt. And the Volt, which is no longer manufactured, could go about 60 miles during the summer on just electric. But then it also had a gasoline backup. So it's switched from the Prius, where it can also use the gasoline to power the electric motor. And so it has a total range of about 360, 380 miles when you add the gasoline to it. Then there's fully electric or battery electric plug-in vehicles, which do not use any liquid fuels at all, no gasoline. They run solely on electric power. For my Volkswagen ID4, it can go about 240 miles on a single charge. It's all-wheel drive, so it goes a little bit less than some of the other versions. So those are fully electric, and that's the 3,100 number. And in Montana, the most number of registered electric vehicles we've seen are in the Flathead, followed by Missoula County, then Gallatin County, and then Yellowstone, Lewis and Clark, and other counties. And when we first started working with this entity called Atlas EV Hub about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot more white counties, counties where there were neither a plug-in hybrid or fully electric vehicles registered at all. And so now we're down to a handful, I think about 6 counties where there aren't any. The lighter blue, there are a handful also. There's only, 1 or 5 or 10. But gradually in the higher populated areas, you're starting to see more and more. We've seen a year-on-end increase of about 75% in the total number of registered electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So we're going to do this data again at the end of this year, at the end of 2023. We would guesstimate at this point that there will probably be a 75% increase in each of those numbers. So it's starting to increase more and more. We're certainly nothing like California or New York or even a Colorado. But it is starting to pick up more registrations. A year ago, if I had shown you this picture of medium and heavy duty vehicles, I would have just been using stock photos that I would have grabbed off the internet. But more and more, these vehicles are showing up in Montana, funded in most instances in part by our Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement funding. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a red dash bus for the University of Montana. I only show it here with the Tesla in the foreground because all these vehicles can use the same type of charging equipment. So this is at the Walmart off a reserve in Missoula, and the bus is charging there. They were having trouble with their chargers, and so the student drivers used to like to drive it over to the Walmart and use the bus's Wi-Fi, and they could do homework while they were charging up the bus. but those buses are now charging on campus. They plan on a day-to-day basis of running all electric vehicles. The University of Montana has 4 electric transit buses. The blue one is for Mountain Line, the City of Missoula's transit agency. They currently have 12 fully electric transit buses, fixed route buses, out of their 29 total fleet. They have committed to going 100% electric by 2030, I think, or maybe it's 35. I think it's 30. They have funding for an additional 14 fixed route transit buses. So I'll bring them up to 26 total buses. And so those are definitely coming. The global street sweeper that you see is owned by the town of Superior. The city of Helena also owns one of these. And it's another great opportunity for them where they know exactly where it's going to go and how it's going to work. It's not like you take any of these vehicles on the highway, throw the family in the back, and go for a family trip over the weekend. These all these vehicles, you know exactly where they're going. The Havre Public Schools has 2 electric school buses right now. They're trying to get more. There will be more school buses showing up on Montana routes later this year in Big Fork, Clinton, Fairfield, East Helena, and Billings. There's currently an open funding opportunity with the US EPA's Clean School Bus program that I wouldn't be surprised if more school buses started showing up from that funding. And in the bottom left-hand corner is a pushback tractor that's operated by the Missoula Airport Authority. There's a total of, I think, at least 2 all-electric pushback tractors at the airport, plus they have 3 all-electric belt loaders. With all of these things, not only is there savings in emission and fuel costs, but also there's a lot of safety improvements. The airport workers love working with these pushback tractors because they can hear each other talk. It's a lot easier to manipulate the airplane as they're moving it back. Same thing with the street sweepers. They love hearing each other, and if somebody wants to come around as they're driving on their way to work, oftentimes the sweeper drivers couldn't hear people honking at them, and so it was a public safety issue. So there's a lot more of these coming. Same thing with passenger vehicles. More and more crossover SUVs, regular passenger vehicles, pickups now. The Chevy Silverado should be released fairly soon. The F-150 Lightning and the Rivian R1T are already on roads. And so we're starting to see more and more types of vehicles hitting the streets. So knowing that there's more types, also some pretty significant batteries. Those transit buses are pretty large batteries. Making sure that you all are aware of them in your communities and are ready to address any incidents is the reason why I reached out, and we hope that we can continue partnering with you all moving into the future. On battery storage systems, we reached out to the electric utilities, MDU, Northwestern, and the electric co-ops. We're aware of 1 active battery storage system in the state, probably 3 more that are planned. There are several that I think have been retired, so I don't believe are operational. I don't think any of these numbers include residential storage, so things like the Tesla Powerwall, where they're ideally a homeowner would have solar panels on their roof, and then their garage they would have a storage system so that if there's a power outage or if they want to be off grid, they could charge up those batteries to power their house and probably their electric vehicle. But we don't have solid numbers on the number of residential storage, but really you would probably want to contact your electric utility in your department service area in order to find out more about what is in people's garages, what type of battery storage the utility may or may not be currently operating or planning to operate. Some of these older systems that were retired use something else than lithium-ion. Some of them were lead acid and other chemicals. So they're all kind of different. I think moving forward, most of them will be lithium-ion, and that's, of course, what we're talking about tonight. So here's my contact information. I'm happy to answer general questions about electric vehicles and the technologies coming out, but I want to hand it over to Chief 'n' 'Brien now. Chief 'n' 'Brien, now.
All right. Thanks, Neil. I hopefully let's get the screen share here. We're going to swap over. So I think Neil did just an absolute great job of kind of laying out what's happening in Montana. I'm going to give you all probably a more global perspective on what is starting to happen both in the EV space, but really all of the batteries. And as Josh said, um, we're looking at Firefighter Safety Stand-down next week is 5 days. And hopefully this first part, we're going to help prep you and then talk through some of the things that you can be doing. So this is an old map, which is only 6 months old and has rapidly changed. This map starts to show all of the battery production that is slated to come out of the ground. And there's about 10 more facilities that look like they've approved planning commission and will start producing batteries. So we've had a major shift in battery production from overseas to now here in the United States. So if you look at Reno, Nevada, one of the facilities down south and the two in Michigan, we're producing about 20 million cells a day right now. And probably by the end of 2025, we'll be producing closer to 200 million cells. That's enough cells to produce about 15 million battery packs. And, we can, when we start to say there's going to be a fundamental shift, we know what GM has told us 2035. You just heard Neil on some of these purchasing acquisitions. And my experience here is telling me that we're going to see that shift much faster, and we're going to see it by what is available for the consumer to purchase. Now, on the other hand, GM is also investing $1 billion in their new truck plant or their truck facility. And that's really the hardest market, this light duty truck, these 2,500, 3,500s, F-250, 350 chassis. We haven't really figured out a great way to electrify those yet and still get the pulling torque or the pulling and towing power. But when it comes to the car market, when you start to look at all of these X's, now it's definitely over on the other side of the Mississippi. And when I say it's changing, Michigan is becoming probably the very quick capital of batteries in the world. We're going to have about 8 battery facilities. And so I think many of us, when we think batteries, right, we think Tesla, we think these types of charging. And there's been a lot of news about this charging equipment. We're going to talk about that in a couple slides. But right, our fire service knows what to do when a fuel pump is run over, but we don't necessarily know what to do when one of these pieces of equipment is run over, both accidentally, intentionally, or whatever it may be. So we have a fundamental shift as leaders in the fire service that we have to start engaging conversations. And I'm so glad Neil was part of this conversation, because all of the answers don't reside within our fire service. There's partners that we have to keep building with. And there's a trend, both our companies are looking to become, and they're being judged based on their green initiatives. This is a Domino's delivery vehicle I saw this week in Rogers, Arkansas. We've seen it and heard it on TV that Domino's is going with an electric fleet. They add that little charger that's up in the upper right-hand corner to their building. It's a level 2 charger, so they can charge a little bit faster, but they'll charge that Chevy Bolt overnight. And so, really when we start to look at it, as fire service, we have to start to really think about, how do I identify that this is an electric vehicle? Because Chevy produces both gasoline and electric. So how do we give our tools for our company officers? And so developing this recognition, we won't always know, but right, here's a charge port. Now this is labeled like a crazy thing, right? But look at this grill. Look at how it started to change. And so there's no openings. And a lot of things that we have to start giving tools to our company officers are, how do they recognize this? Because this vehicle, both in extrication as well as fire response, is going to produce us a couple different things. So we saw earlier the Tesla charging, right? This is what you could see in somebody's home, but this in this case is installed at a commercial building. So from a fire chief perspective, what are we doing for pre-incident planning and showing rapid disconnects? Now, this guy right here, this is in a commercial parking lot, right? This charge point is a very common provider across the United States. We're seeing these pop up. Well, the question is, if there was a vehicle charging and it was starting to have an incident, can we quickly find where the building disconnects are? Now, we're talking EVs, but the electrification is a much bigger thing. In the lower right-hand corner here, this picture is a Home Depot in South Carolina, and we're seeing the change of batteries happen all across the United States. And it's not just EVs. There wasn't one gas power piece of equipment there. Now, as the fire service, right, we've seen this in our movement of our jaws of life and our extrication equipment switching from hydraulic over into batteries. And we're now seeing it more and more with some of our other tools and equipment as well, right? We're used to the charging equipment, but some of the Tesla facilities in this equipment, not all, but some include batteries. So it's not just the hazards associated with the equipment, but when we choose to put batteries in boxes, there's some things and challenges that affect our fire service. So fast forward, this big picture here, in each one of these cases is a Tesla Powerwall waiting to be installed. So this was a business that installed photovoltaic panels. They installed power walls, and really up until about what was it, about 2 months ago with Tesla, you could not install a power wall unless you had photovoltaic. And now they're saying, hey, look, you can buy our power walls. And so our residential code and fire code start to give us some tools, but here we are dealing with this. We think about it in the fixed environment, and as fire chiefs, as leadership, we've got to start thinking, boy, there's somewhere storing these. There's someplace storing EV batteries. There's someplace storing spare batteries. Well, here was one. And we had a fire that was actually started by a DeWalt drill that ended up having, it was stored inside. You can see the fire damage up here at the ceiling level. We consumed about four or five pallets. So this pallet, this pallet, this pallet were all consumed by fire and added to the fire environment. Very difficult fire for our folks. Presented with some very difficult challenges. Now they're at a low state of charge, so they're going to burn typically like some Group A plastics. But this scene right here is playing out all over the United States, and especially as we get closer to the automotive, right? We're living this in the Detroit area. We have thousands of facilities. These are not battery production, but it's a facility that's been hired to test. But what I really like is you can start to see, right? Look at this casing here and look at how the manufacturers really trying to limit water incursion, right? They're building very robust battery packs so that in collisions they can sustain. But when we start to look here where the yellow is, look at how that battery pack, so we have cells, right? And the cells could be cylindrical, they could be in a square, they could be in a pouch. And they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're put into modules, right? One of these guys right here is a module, and then we put it into the whole thing, which is a battery pack. And they can come in different shapes and sizes. So you see these bump ups here like this, all of these bump ups. Those things there are more batteries, right? Or how do we start to put and add these into the whole thing? If you want to grab a screen capture of that, we can also share that link with everybody as well. But there's some quick links to some resources that you can use with your crews. We're going to talk about some at the safety stand down as well. We really want to make sure that we're sharing in learning, because this is really what's starting to happen. How do we learn from the responses that have happened across the country? How do we learn from our peers, whether it's here in the United States, Canada, or abroad? And how do we start to round out? Because when we start to think of all this battery production, the fire service is integrated in so many of these levels. So this part right here represents all those X's, right? This stuff is all those X's of making batteries. I want you to think about all of this raw material and how it starts to have to be transported from wherever the raw materials come to the locations making batteries. So then when we make the batteries, they're going to test them typically within the site, and then they're going to start to get them, right? It might be a direct access here, but we have this thing that's happening across the United States. So it's easy to think of all of those X's, but what about all the labs that are now making new chemistries, right? We have zinc oxide, zinc manganese, nickel hydrogen, lithium metal batteries. We've got all these different chemistries that are starting to come to fruition, and we're seeing them pretty typically first in the ESS, and then we're starting to see them come out and have some discussion in the EV market. But regardless, we're going to make those cells somewhere, and then they're going to get shipped. So again, right here, we have a truck hauling batteries somewhere, and our firefighters might have to interact. So we put them together and we use them, whether it's mobility, EV, energy storage, we're going to use them. And then we hit end of life. And this is the part that scares me the most. I think as a fire service, we can answer the question on what to do with EV. We can answer the question what to do with ESS. Now they're tough, difficult, but when we start to get into this end of life, that recycling is really what's starting to get difficult, right? We have communities that want to take car batteries and start putting them in the built environment. They don't have the safety standards. They're going to lead to big issues for our fire service. And arguably, when the battery pack is done in its original packaging, it needs to go to collection, which means it's going to get hauled on the road. It's going to go to a storage facility where they start to get transferred and loaned out. And then it's going to end up back on the road, and we're going to get to recycle. Companies like Li-Cycle, Redwood Materials are getting to the point where they can start to recycle about 95% of the material and push it back into the stream. So as fire chiefs, we've got to really look at where fires are happening all across the United States. There's no doubt mobility, consumer grade, and scooter board. Now, let me pause for 1 second because I need to say this. If you take a couple things home as we start to prepare for Firefighter Safety Stand-down, if you've heard me speak before, you've got to change your local data within your community, whether you use a +1 code in your NFIRS reporting or you start to add a special study in your fire records management. Add that resource so you can start to track your battery fires. And then we've got to get our staff trained to start to identify, because these are happening all over the United States. I have a Google thing where we're seeing these mobility fires, we're seeing EV fires, and there's at least 5 a day across the United States. So we're getting mobility, consumer, electric hybrid, recycling, energy storage, and of course, storage and manufacture. Now, it's important to say that both GM, Chrysler, Stellantis, Lucid, Rivian, Tesla, they're all making great products, right? And it's on them to continue to build great cells. It's on them to keep refining their battery packs so we can limit the implications that we might have. And so not all batteries are bad, right? But there are new hazards. And I can only think back to when we were starting to put gasoline in fuel tanks, what the fire service back then was starting to say is they were trying to learn about these best practices and how we could use fuel, right? But we know that we can see quite a bit here where it's really making benefit for us. And so hopefully this video is playing, but this is part of the gig economy that's happening. This is a personal electronic device in a box. And you can see it was starting, you heard the explosions, or you could see the visualizations if you couldn't see it, but you could see this device was in a box, and it was 30 minutes prior to this, it was in a UPS vehicle in Muskegon, Michigan. This battery ended up causing a total fire loss. And what this person did is they worked for their own gig economy. You could send them your battery pack that was no longer working. They would rebuild it and send it to you. Well, you can see the hazards. 30 minutes earlier, that was on a UPS truck. So the question is, why are batteries causing issues, right? We know that if we crush, penetrate, squeeze, that there's a high likelihood that in that mechanical abuse, we're going to create a short circuit. Likewise, we could have some kind of electrical abuse, both internal and external. And as the batteries start to age, note that these things can start to increase. Now, when we cause one of these, it can put the adjacent cells to start to overheat, and it's going to create this off-gassing, fire, and possibly explosion. And so it's pretty simple that when we have these issues, we want to keep it right here, right? We need the designers to put separators in. We need them to design really good cells that can limit that cell-to-cell propagation. Unfortunately, this is what happens. So when you hear the popping, right? If this was cell number 1, you started hearing popping. So cell 2 got mad, cell 3 got mad, cell 4, 5, so on and so forth. So when you hear that popping, right, that heat, if we think back to here, we have this heat and we're overheating cells. So UL-FSRI took this test, and they basically recreated an event, and I'm going to play it here real quick on this news
This
story.
demonstration shows what it looks like when a lithium-ion battery fails and sparks a fire, often because of faulty design or overcharging. Those batteries causing more than 200 fires in New York City alone last year, injuring 147 people and killing 6. And look at this battery catching fire and exploding next to a child.
Start of charge in 5, 4.
We met with researchers in Pennsylvania to see what happens when a lithium-ion battery is purposely overcharged and fails, starting a fire.
We are here with Steve Kerber. He is with UL's Fire Safety Research Institute. So, Steve, we're actually inside of a home built to burn.
We study how fire grows and spreads, and we purposely instrument it so we can figure out how to keep people safe for emerging technologies like this.
Kerber and his team outfitted this 1,600 square foot house with everything you'd find in the typical American home. Then they rigged it with cameras and an array of sensors that measure heat and gases.
It's going to catch fire, it's going to release a lot of gas, and we're going to see an explosion.
Researchers
Note that Steve
removed
said
the
gas.
safety
He didn't
features
say
on the
smoke. He
battery
said
to
gas.
ensure it would fail. After 2 hours of overcharging the
this.
scooter, smoke. 17 seconds later, the explosion buckled the windows. This is what it looked like from the inside. 12 minutes later, the
So we know that fire is fast, right? We've been telling our public fire is fast, but never have we seen deflagration, never have we seen flashover conditions in 17 to 30 seconds. So one of the big issues is not only when we start to see those visible signs of production is, a lot of people say, well, Mike, just put the battery fire out. Well, it's a three-dimensional fire. It's something that has a lot, if we understand basic chemistry, it's producing and filling much of that fire triangle, fire tetrahedron, and we can't stop it. So take a look at this video here.
They were charging, monitoring the telemetry coming off that
Look
battery.
how fast that
Everything was
goes.
going
Look how
fine.
we went to zero visibility. Look at the
They
jetting
left
of the
for lunch.
flames. Look at the distance. So very, very fast.
And we had the battery explode. And if you notice where that fire came out was exactly where our
CO2
researchers were
extinguisher.
standing. It could have been a very
Note it
bad
doesn't
day.
work.
This is an intern from the adjacent laboratory. He had climbed through a window. He was not associated with this project. He was using a CO2 fire extinguisher that was in the area. And as you notice, the CO2 fire extinguisher is not effective in putting out that fire. The safety data sheet had called for.
So that continues, right? So part of what we have to really start to educate our staff on is off-gassing of batteries is really filled with a lot of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and a flammable mixture. And so when we start to see fires involving even mobility devices all the way into recycling issues, what capabilities do we have to stop that thermal runaway incident, right? And so when you start to think about even this sense, right, the battery collection that is happening across the United States in our built environment, have we done what the fire service should do to educate our community on the hazards? Nothing is stopping anybody from putting a damaged battery pack in here that could cause us a much bigger issue. So fast forward, you think about it, a lot of smart people on this call, can you answer the question if your significant other comes to you and says, hey, I have this swollen and hot battery pack, one that you might use as you travel to charge your cell phone. Do we know how to properly recycle that and keep it out of our waste stream? Because if we just dump it in here, we could cause an issue. If we're not properly packaging it, transporting it, and getting it to recycling, it's just going to end up in the waste stream. And so there's a lot of companies that are starting to spin up, right? Redwood Materials here wants all of your products because that's what they think is how they can get to some of those raw materials. And so think of this, all of this product at some point in the road right here was in a semi. It was headed to a recycling. This is Redwood's 50 acres outside storage in Story County outside Reno, Nevada. And look at what these fire crews had to deal with. Now imagine, right, all of that smoke you see is off gas. It's filled with carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, flammable. But look at how those cells are shooting across. The engine was parked about 200 feet away, and cells were landing on top of. So if you think about the hazards we see, we have the gas, we have explosion potential, we have shooting projectiles, we have explosions. All of those are hazards that we've got to teach our staff, both in the mobility space, in the EV space, in the recycling space, that they've got to be ready to deal with, right? This is a product from 5 years ago that caught on fire in my jurisdiction in a semi, caused that semi to buckle. So as our fire crews pulled up, they said, hey, chief, the semi burped. This was a +6 hour incident for us. And all of these incidents are starting to drive up our on-scene time in many ways, shapes, and forms, right? So as all of these crazy hazards are starting to approach and hit us, it's not just the rapid change, right? When you really start to think about it, I think by 2028, it's going to be very difficult for us to be buying gasoline powered anything. And so we've got a major change that is going to be happening in all of our communities, including Montana and everywhere else. So we said, how do we start driving some of this community discussion? Because if a car fire is going to go from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours, if how we tow it could cause a vehicle to catch on fire, we really need to start having some conversations. So if you follow that link, it's going to take you to this IAFC bulletin, and we'll walk through some of this for what can happen. But really, when you think about it as a fire chief, what an opportunity we have with all of the batteries to start to bring our community together, our fire stations together, both from training to our fire prevention, fire marshal, CRR folks, to our battalion chiefs, our operation folks, to start to have a big guideline. And so we have to have this conversation knowing, right, we've got to train them on lithium-ion batteries, the hazards that are going to exist, that we can't use our traditional means, and we're going to have to think of different techniques. So if you think about it right now, when you respond to a current ICE gasoline-powered vehicle, if you need to get to the hood, you cut it, you pry it open, you get underneath the hood. Part of the difficulty here is where the battery pack is located underneath the vehicle. We don't have access to get water where it needs to be. Remember, the manufacturers are spending a lot of energy to keep water out of the battery pack. And so really our paradigm has to shift. If somebody is trapped in the vehicle, or there are ready exposures, both maybe it's parked in a garage, maybe it's parked in a parking deck, maybe there's adjacent cars, we need to work to actively cool with large amounts of water. So if you don't have access to hydrants, plan on about 8,000 gallons. And we need to actively cool. This isn't 8,000 gallons right now. This is sustained 2 hand lines, 150 gallons a minute for some period in time, trying to keep that battery pack cool. The car is going to be totaled either way, but it's going to have to become okay when we choose to let it burn. Now, how we got to a lot of this discussion was really working with the manufacturers. All of them have a response guide for all of their vehicles. So if you were to go to your phone or you were to go to your computer and say, hey, look, find the Rivian emergency response guides. Teslas are some of the easiest to find, but both within that hyperlink that I shared earlier, there's the Mike's Links page where I put a bunch. There are, NFPA has a bunch of these. There's a lot of apps, but here's my thing, folks, pull them off the manufacturer's webpage. When you choose to go to these, go and look at them and find them on the manufacturer's webpage. A couple tricks here. I don't expect our first in company officers on a vehicle fire to be not doing work and anticipating that they need to pull up a response guide. But what we've got to do is start to build some systems and structures that's continual and repetitive, right? Think about that, what that company officer needs at 2 o'clock in the morning on a vehicle fire. And so just like we do 360s on a building fire, really what I'm encouraging our staff to do now, whether it is whether we are on a vehicle accident or whether we are on a vehicle fire, company officer gets out, operator or somebody on the engine gets out, chalks the vehicle wheels that's in the accident or that's part of the fire. Officers doing a 360, looking for hazards and trying to identify the vehicle. So they're looking for charge ports, vehicle marking, tagging, contact from the owner. They're looking for entrapment exposures. And then when they complete that 360, radio it back. So as our command staff, we can start to hear second in units and whatever. But think about, how do we keep this real simple? So if that company officer is deciding to actively cool, note I didn't say extinguish when the high voltage battery pack. If the inside of the car is on fire, please put it out. But if the battery pack is on fire, you have to make a choice to either let it go or actively cool. And so have them come back and say, hey, this is a Tesla Model Y. That way our second in companies, third in companies can start pulling up those guides. Think about what they could do even on the extrication. Hey, dispatch engine 2, I'm on scene. 360 shows that I've got a Tesla Model Y. I've got heavy impingement. Beginning extrication, go ahead and give me an extrication toner. However you do it in your community, we are now triggering up, and then we train our incoming staff, get your CADs, get your computers, pull up response guides so we can start. So when we look at fires, I want you to look at what some of this language starts to say, because some people think I'm making this stuff up, right? Right here, Rivian believes that electric vehicles are best addressed with defensive firefighting and management of the environment to minimize risk. Only attempt to extinguish If you have a specific need to do so, wear full PPE with SCBA. They're saying 2,000 to 3,000 gallons of water. Here's the tip, right? Keep doing what you're doing. Don't move the vehicle until that battery pack's below 212, right? That's Rivian. Check this out with Tesla. Use water to fight high voltage fire. Possible reignition. We're seeing up to 3 weeks in post-accident issues. And so here they're saying, here's their 3,000 to 8,000 gallons of water. You can try other things, but don't use it. Tesla does not recommend the use of foam on electric vehicles. Tesla will also say, don't submerge. See this right here? Don't submerge it. So some people say, well, I'm going to get the battery, the thing, and put it in there. Folks, the difference here for us, and this is the hard, really hard, stupid part. None of us want to sit there and just let a vehicle burn. It really hurts our egos. It really hurts everything that's in play. But really, we're trying to maximize our resources. How many of you can tie up 4 and 5 companies on a single vehicle fire when we don't have ready access to hydrants? And so I go back, what would be very simple, right? We send 1, maybe 2 engines on a vehicle fire right now. And what I would say is, I'm really trying to ask our crews, just order up a structured fire response. That will tell us a lot of what's going on. This is part of GM, right? So GM talks about, right, potential for reburn, use copious amounts of water. Ooh, look at what they start to say. Skin contact may cause irritation. Gases are toxic. Look at this stuff that's in their response guides. So if you were to type in GM response guide Hummer, you would find some of this stuff. So here's a Tesla, right? And I want you to see this battery condition. You see the fire coming out from underneath the vehicle. That's where the battery pack is. Teslas are designed to push down. And this is from the fire department. They're on scene. They've secured their roadway, right? So safety stand down. What is the most important thing that we need to do? And that is protect our work environment, right? Proper fend off, shut down freeways when we need it. This is a tough thing for us, but you can see how that battery pack, you'll see the different cells. We would want to make sure we're not in that vapor cloud. Remember, vapor cloud, that's gas, it's not smoke. Now there might be some smoke there because there's some normal combustible starting to burn. Check out the second part of this, right? I think you'd be okay if you started knocking some of that down. There's the crew in a ready state, kind of letting it do its thing. And, you know, once it's done, you're going to wait about 45 to 60 minutes. Now, this is our good friend Ian here, the guy in the orange helmet. He's the company boss. And so Neal did a great job starting to lay out that it's not right. We know a Tesla is a battery powered vehicle. This is a BMW. We didn't know, right? So a lot of manufacturers are going to say, hey, Mike, the badging is going to tell you if this is an electric vehicle. Well, all this badging fell off. So Ian, when he did a 360, he saw tailpipes and he thought, well, this is a combustion vehicle. But you see this guy right here. This is a charge port, right? It's not fuel, right? So trying to come up with a way to identify. This took us about 3,000 gallons of water. And the battery pack on this one, after we looked at it, so normally the battery pack is down here, right? That's not where it was. It's up here and underneath this seat, right? And the Jeep plug-in hybrid, which is one of the biggest selling vehicles right now for Stellantis and Jeep, that's the same. Their battery packs are about 17 kilowatt hour battery packs in those 2 spots. And so we'll come back a little bit on the EV, but really I encourage you to take those guides, start having conversations with your incident commander, start empowering your training folks. And if you don't know where to start, we're going to talk about some tricks you can do next week in a couple slides, right? So we did the same with ESS, and Neal kind of highlighted that you guys got some very limit, right? The batteries and boxes don't do well in the wintertime. But again, we're going to have a very defensive approach, right? And this is coming off of what the manufacturers recommend. When we think about a mega pack, which is the size of a semi, they are purposely putting those into self-destruct mode. Some of the things that we learned out of Surprise, Arizona, and we have drastically changed. So as fire chiefs, we really need to push modern fire codes, right? Even if we're not on them, because there are companies that are pushing bad product here into the United States. LG Chem's one of them. They're shipping the same thing that caused the issues in Surprise, Arizona, and they're putting it in communities because they know that a lot of our communities are not enforcing the modern fire code, both whether it's IFC, NFPA 1, NFPA 855. When we start to meet those current standards, we've eliminated a good portion of the hazards. And this is what I was looking for. So we have response guides. And so you can see here, look at this. That's a power wall, right? That's what Tesla puts in your home, right? The power pack, you're going to start to see in some commercial settings. And this is the ground baby, right? This is like a 50-foot semi filled with batteries. But these things have a self-destruct mode, and it's part of their full-scale testing because batteries in boxes are bad. And if we don't take care of the ventilation, I want you to think what happens when we start to put batteries in boxes. And when I say boxes, it could be a garage, it could be a container, it could be an outside storage system. When we put them in there and we start to get the buildup of gas, it's flammable gas. So what happened in the semi case in Brighton Fire, when the crew said it burped, it hit a flammable limit and ignited. So here's what Tesla's saying, right? Because one of the hardest ones is going to be when that battery pack is venting, right? The fire service is used to taking things apart. We don't want them to do that. We want to evacuate the area. We want lots of ventilation. We want you to maintain a safe distance. We want you to take a defensive stance towards the burning unit. And you can see some of the separation distance. So full PPE. And if this is inside somebody's garage, this is a long event. If you have one of the large ESS in the utility grid, I think the fire service is very well prepared to not enter utility grids. But at some point, somebody's going to ask, that's a 12-hour incident, right? And we're seeing it happen all over the place where the fire crews are there to protect exposures, manage the incident. They're going to let it burn out, but that's a 12-hour incident. You know, Tesla's Powerwall is tested, it's listed, it's a good product. One of the things that scares me is in this rack, this was a homemade ESS, right? So you can now buy PV from IKEA online. You can buy battery cells, and people are like, man, I don't want to pay $10,000 for a Powerwall and live off the grid. I'm going to build my own. This thing didn't have more than 2 days of power on it, caught on fire in a garage. And so we as right, the fire chief was saying, Mike, these cells are shooting at us. What do we do? And so we have the initial response, but then how do we stop the secondary response? And there's a big discussion that has to take place. So one of the number one phone calls I get is, well, Mike, I hate EVs and I'm not going to let them in my town. So I'm going to ban these chargers and parking decks. I don't want them. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that somewhere within the next 5 years, your parking decks are going to be entirely EVs. And so if we as fire chiefs do not advocate for public community charging, some of the things that are happening is people are starting to steal power from very, very unique places. And so they're tapping into other sources. You ever have a firefighter call you and say, hey, somebody pulled up alongside our building and they are they plugged into the outside wall so they can get some 110 power. But really, BWI Airport is saying that on some of their parking decks, people are bootlegging power off power poles. Well, part of our job as community risk reduction is to reduce incidents. I'm pretty sure that if we don't have adequate charging and people are going to find places to charge and make it up themselves, I would much rather see licensed quality things put in versus the other. Now, there's a couple things here when we start to see this. Where's the shutoff and how do we identify that in our pre-incident planning? So if this vehicle, I know it's not a hybrid, but if this one was in charging and we started, this will be my fire event. Ooh, fire, right? If we have a fire event, it's an electrical fire. Part one, we've got to get this disconnected. Well, I'd much rather have a panic switch or a mushroom switch or something that we can get that shut down. So starting to have that conversation. So realizing that batteries in boxes are bad, this is a UL test, okay? And note the garage, and what they did is they started to create some of the gas composures from whether it's an EV or an ESS in the garage, and note where the garage door ended up. This is our good friends over in Mountain View, Colorado. Fire crews went in through the front door for a smoke investigation, found pretty significant smoke on the first floor. They went down in the basement, found even heavier, very dense smoke, and never found any fire. They went in that one garage, that small one, and as soon as they started to put water on it, this garage door blew off. There was a fire captain. You can find the video online. The fire captain's right there. It actually knocked his helmet off. And this garage door almost took his head out. This is the explosive danger we have, right? So helping to build up crews, as Neal was saying, as we get more energy storage, as we get more EVs and they're parking in, when we respond to garages with smoke, we need to be very much head on a swivel because of that hazard that might be affiliated. right? If the garage door was here, how, if we had to breach into this, right, we end up taking what? We will just end up putting a cut. Well, what happens if that's a rich environment inside there and we're using a sparking saw, right? So this is the firefighters and the fire crew from Mountain View. You can see that's the Jeep plug-in. So some good tips and tools and tricks, right? Go find that emergency response and look it up. Look up, see if you can find the Jeep Wrangler plug-in hybrid response and see where the batteries are. And this is the incident in Birmingham, Alabama. That red truck used to be a fully enclosed semi. It was this was mixed commodities, like in that upper right-hand corner, mixed electronic batteries, lithium-ion, stored in 55-gallon drums. And he was parked at a truck stop, went out for lunch, and the semi-trailer blew up. That's not a flatbed, folks. That was a box trailer. And so not only did we have the emergency response, but this was a plus 24, 48-hour incident for the fire crews because there was overpacking that had to be done to get it back out on the DOT, right? Here's that one from Brighton. You can see up here that bend in the trailer from all that product. So here we are with safety stand down, and I'm going to switch screens. And hopefully everybody hopefully sees my screen. So these are all downloads off of, actually, let me go back. I want to do one more slide here real quick. So when we look here, safety stand down, safety and health section, IAFC, NVFC, IAFF, UL, NFPA have all been working very collectively on this. And so we have 5 days. We've got recognition of hazards. So partly you hear me talking about the off-gassing, the cells, the projectiles, both from mobility to vehicles to energy storage, et cetera, right? So we're going to have that introduction. We've got a video introduction for you to use. Tuesdays, firefighting operations in response, Wednesdays, firefighter safety. So, there's a lot of unanswered questions that we're still working on, post-incident considerations, public education. And I'm making the argument that there's never been a time for us to be great fire chiefs and drive that community discussion about what should be happening. So here's day one on the recognition of hazards. If you were to click on the link, right, we can start to talk about identification, right? We've seen issues with cigarettes to phones to power tools, micro mobility, e-scooters, e-bikes. And so how do we start to drive the dialogue, right? Our fire investigators want to know what questions they're supposed to be asking. So is it the right charger for the right piece of equipment, the right battery for the right piece of equipment? And we have to really start advocating to our public that they're using the right battery for their equipment. No longer should we be looking at buying off-spec, off-brand, right? One of the bigger causes, and I can't prove it because it's so hard, is people making their own battery packs. And it's very common in RC vehicles. So for day one, right, if I was fire chief, get some of your staff involved in this. See if they can find some videos of the fire. See if they can pull up and start to educate your staff, right? Why are they hazardous? What's thermal runaway? Look at all these resources. Neal talked about the UL training. It's right there. We've got the ESS fact sheet. We've got stuff at FDNY Smart. There is so many great tools that you and your crews can start to do to start to build up that education. So that's day one, right? Day two, when we start talking about firefighting with lithium ion, we have to start to understand a lot of different things here. But to me, part of this is vehicle identification. Does one of your staff have a Tesla or an electronic vehicle, plug-in hybrid? Is there somebody in your community that you can bring them up? Can you go visit a dealer? Could you put a call on, right? But because part of this is, if you've never driven a Tesla, how you put it in park, how you put it in drive is much different than how I put my Ford F-150. But can we pull it up? Better, can we start to instill hazard or can we start to instill best practices? Can they find response guides? Can we start reading them? Pull up 5 or 6 and say, hey, can we find the GM Bolt? Can we find the Ford F-150 Lightning? Can we find the Rivian Amazon delivery van? Can we find BYD? Can we, right? Find it and start to have a discussion. You want to look really smart because you were on this call? Look up the Ford F-150 submerged battery vehicle and compare that in the response guide. So you're going to pull up the response guide, go to the section on submerged vehicle, read it on the Ford F-150. Then I want you to read, I don't care, pull a Tesla Model Y, right? Pull the Tesla Model Y. and have your staff read it. Say, okay, we're dispatched to a car in the water. We don't know what type of vehicle it is. And we all of a sudden figure out it's an electronic. Are our staff going to get shocked? Compare the Ford F-150 all the way over. And so I think you have a big opportunity here to not only start to talk about this, but right, there's a lot here that people say on how we're going to actively cool the battery pack. Folks, I want you to let it burn. I want you to let it burn. If there's no exposures, nobody trapped, it's okay. Have that discussion with folks. But it's very difficult. If you're going to try to cool, you've got to get water on the underside. So using a lift jack might be the way to tilt the vehicle, but look at the conversations that you need to have. There needs to be pre-conversations with our towing company. This is now a 2.5 to 3 hour incident. So when the vehicle, whether you let it burn or actively cool, when it stops off gassing, you need to wait 45 minutes. 45 minutes. If it starts smoking again, start your timer again. So after that, they can tow it. Read the response guides. It's going to tell them how to tow it. It's going to talk to them about where it needs to go. But one of the bigger discussions that we have to have is there's a big difference between a vehicle and a fender bender with airbag deployment versus a vehicle at 150 miles an hour into a fixed object. And so the manufacturers right now say, hey, don't store vehicles when they've had battery pack damage within 60 feet because there's a high likelihood it's going to catch on fire. What they need to do is work with the tow providers to start and come out and pull the stranded energy out. We can't do that. But many places, depending on the severity, right, we can't follow that fender bender vehicle all the time, but we still need the tow company to tow it right, store it right, so we don't have secondary incidents. So use the IAFC guide, build your response, then use day 2 as a way. Let's talk mobility fires, right? For the most part, the mobility incident is done, but there's a couple things our staff can start to do so we don't have big issues. And what I mean by that is put the fire out and then pause for a minute, use your tick, look to see if there's mobility, powered electronics, battery packs, and then more importantly, get them out before you aggressively overhaul if that's what you're going to do. Get them outside the structure. That's part 1. Part 2 is what's going to happen on day 4. How do we start to overpack that and what's the solution? Because what we don't want to have happen is leave that in the house and then we end up back on a rekindle tonight or somewhere down because not all of the cells were consumed by fire, right? And if the cells are quite possibly could be ejected, they could be still in the battery pack, but they were not, and they had not vented, but it's an angry cell now. And so we have a lot of work to do. And so we've got a lot of things here that we can start to look at and start to have that discussion. Day 3 is really, hey, what's this health and safety officer? There's a lot of discussion. Is the water runoff hazardous? Is the smoke hazardous? What are we supposed to do? And so we really wanted to start to say, hey, look, we've got to start to build up some stuff here. Our good friends up in Seattle are doing a lot of good work. We're seeing a lot of good work from all over, but pausing, right, and saying, hey, from a safety standpoint, vehicle fires, long scene time. We can't have firefighters for 2 hours in air packs. Right? We've got to give them breaks. So how do we manage those incidents? Day 4 is all about post-incident mitigation. And so, right, I put the swollen battery incident in here because, hey, what are we supposed to do with the swollen battery incident? And how do we as community leaders start to drive that conversation? Is there somebody within my community that's already doing waste collection, battery collection that we can partner with? So if somebody comes to our fire station and says they've got this battery pack that's bad, what do we do? How about the post-home and commercial building fires where there were mobility devices in? So we get it out of the structure. That's part 1. So I gave this presentation to some fire chiefs in Alabama, and a chief called me and he says, hey, Mike, we did that. We got the battery. We got it out. 3 weeks later, we went back on a rekindle. And I said, well, what happened? And he said they started cleaning up the site. So the scooter that was part of the fire ended up in the dumpster. They started piling more stuff in the dumpster, which was right next to the house. And they threw the fridge in, right? And it crushed the battery pack again. And not all of the cells they think were consumed. And it started back on fire, which then spread into the house. So here's the question. Getting it out of the house is part 1. Now, I'm assuming nobody there has got high rises, but if you have high rise, mid rise residential, you've got to come up with very detailed of how you're going to move that to get it out of the structure. We don't want it in the elevator. If you do use the elevator, it's unstaffed. You would auto push it down through controls. But here's the thing, how do we overpack this, right? Look up companies like Cell Block, look up companies like Call to Recycle. But what I'm finding more and more is our communities already have people that are dealing with batteries. How do we have a community discussion? We're not like New York, who their waste management company can come pick them up. What we need to stop is when there's a bad device, it ending up in the waste stream, because compaction truck fires are on the rise, trash transfer facilities are on the rise, because battery packs are getting in there. So how can we get these products into post-incident? We gave you some links here on PHMSA, right? So how those things are hauled on the road. DOT is a great resource for us. And so ESS systems have to have requirements for decommissioning. There's things with post-incident, and this is a big one. Send your CRR people, send you as the fire chief, go out, go meet with your tow companies and start to have this dialogue of how are we going to move these things post-incident, and how are we going to save it? Likewise, how do we start driving this conversation with our community? How do we prevent these from not becoming incidents, right? It's the right charger for the right piece of equipment. It's batteries, taking good quality. You don't need to charge your cell phone to 100% every day. If you start to have problems, stop charging it. Don't charge when you're not home. And so we used the NFPA, the e-bike, e-scooter. We've got some stuff on electrical vehicles. We're seeing a lot of janky home installs where homeowners are putting it in because they don't want to wait. We have a huge shortage on equipment, so they're buying this just crap, and it's bad connectors. And so we really need to keep pushing here. One of the things that's happening too is you look at GM, they're creating this arm called GM Energy, and they're putting batteries in their charging equipment and not meeting the ESS requirements. Once you start to put batteries in boxes and it's over 17 kilowatt hours, it becomes an issue, right? So think of the messaging. We should start advocating for safe messaging. Something as simple as just hanging up the connector when you're done so it doesn't get run over. For us, finding disconnects. But here's the take home. Look at this right here. We need to eat and drink our own medicine here, folks. We have a lot of battery powered stuff on our fire trucks, and we have FOMO. What's FOMO? Fear of missing out, right? So we keep those things charged up. We don't like when anything dips below 3/4. Well, keeping a constant charge on our battery, PPV fan or battery, whatever, is going to cause battery issues. There are over a dozen battery incidents that I know of that are happening on fire trucks from batteries exploding and the like. So how do we teach our staff? Look, if you have battery operated JAWS and you drop that JAWS unit on the battery pack, how to inspect it, how to test it, and how to stay alert. Because an off-gassing battery in a cabinet is going to cause an explosion. And so how are we and what are we doing in that recycling market? What are we doing for our stuff? Have that discussion. And you as fire chiefs can start to drive this conversation and really get into that data. And there's so many great things. Here's some activities, right? Put on your Facebook that on Saturday, anybody with an electric vehicle, you want them to come over to your fire station and start to show your firefighters how to operate it. There's fact sheets, there's a pre-quiz, there's going to be a post-quiz. You can share your story. But what I can tell you what really works, this is a big elephant, folks, and just start chipping away at it. Maybe all you want to do is one response guide a day and have your crews read it and understand it. And maybe that's part one. I don't know. But not doing anything isn't a great answer. Maybe it's figuring out where our battery recycling is. Maybe it's bringing our staff together and saying, how could we handle and let them start to troubleshoot this problem collectively. So lots of great stuff here. This is the web page, resources planning, there's videos, lots of resources that you can click on. And then, here's a guide I'd be happy to share too that we came up with the IAFC, talking about what thermal runaway is, what the typical hazards are, what common hazards, common actions are, so you can start to talk some of the lingo. Hey, and when all else fails, you start dumping a lot of water on an EV and it doesn't go out, okay, it's no big deal. It's just going to be a long incident, and we just really need to make sure that we are doing what we can to keep our staff's head on a swivel. The EV on fire on the side of the freeway with nobody in it is no big deal. I mean, I hate to sound that way, but folks, this is an opportunity for us to say, hey, look, these batteries can create us some very difficult incidents. And so we need to keep educating our staff so that they can keep looking and really start to dive into everything that's going on so they can recognize it and stay safe. I don't know if questions came up in the chat. I know we're kind of there, but I'm happy to answer any questions or start to have some dialogue on other topics.
Well, thanks, Chief O'Brien, and Neal as well. If anybody's got questions, you can drop them in the chat, or if you want to use the raise your hand, I'll try to monitor both the best I can. Additionally, I know a lot of you are watching at the fire station, so if there's more than one person who needs a certificate of attendance for tonight, just drop an email address into the chat and Michael can take care of that. So I'll open it for questions, whether that's via chat or via hand, if there are any.
Silence is concurrence or something there, I think, Josh.
This is good, Mike.
I put them to, yeah.
No. It's they're probably sitting there scratching their heads wondering, holy cow, didn't know there was that much going on. But oh, here we go. See, you got to give them a minute.
Yeah. So Dustin, you're spot on. I didn't really hit on it, but there are some very fast emerging technologies. So we're seeing sodium, nickel, hydrogen, zinc oxide. We're seeing this great rush, right? So everything you've heard, right? How do we secure raw materials? Getting to 200 million cells a day is a lot of raw materials. And so Ford, GM, Stellantis, Tesla, they're becoming material brokers. But there's this Silicon Valley because of all this money coming out of the IRA, I'm drawing a blank, the federal government's money, essentially, and the Inflation Reduction Act. And so there's a lot of money. So you're seeing a lot of new chemistry coming out. And so there's going to be some new hazards, but they're all fighting this. Our stuff doesn't catch on fire, which is kind of cool.
All right. I'll give it just another minute for questions while we're waiting on that. Michael threw the link in there for the safety stand down next week. It's a great opportunity. Chief O'Brien gave us kind of a sneak peek of what's there. If you're going to be at the fire station next week, take this opportunity to educate members of your team and your leadership about really what's going on in our community. As Neal showed us to start, this is here in Montana. This is not something that's just a California or a Florida thing. It is real and it is happening. So we need to make sure that we take advantages of opportunities like this to make sure that our crews and our teams are prepared for whatever's coming. So. And there's my cue from Michael. Chief O'Brien, thank you, sir. I know you're on the road. Appreciate you taking your time. Neal, thank you for kicking us off tonight and kind of giving us some insight of what's going on in our state. Fantastic event. I thank you both for your time this evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good evening.